The journey to the distant planet had begun long before the spacecraft ever left Earth. For months, the crew had prepared for a mission unlike anything humanity had attempted before. They trained their bodies to survive extreme conditions and strengthened their minds to face whatever waited beyond the known stars. They were not ordinary travelers. They were scientists, explorers, and engineers, the best humanity had to offer. Each person had been carefully chosen for their knowledge, their skills, and most importantly, their courage. Because the world they were traveling toward was unlike any other. A planet hidden far beyond familiar space. A planet surrounded by rumors and unanswered questions. According to the stories, an unknown species lived there, one that many believed could be the most terrifying civilization in the galaxy. But no one knew the real reason. Some claimed it was their intelligence, a level of understanding beyond any known species. Others believed it was their physical strength, their ability to survive conditions that would destroy ordinary life. And some whispered about something far more disturbing, something invisible, something that could not be measured by machines or seen with human eyes. As the spacecraft traveled deeper into the darkness of space, the crew carried both excitement and fear. They knew the moment they entered the planet's atmosphere, there would be no easy escape, no second chance. Inside the spacecraft, the silence was broken only by the hum of the engines and the quiet conversations of the crew. Every person on board felt it, the weight of what was coming. They were not just exploring a new world. They were about to meet something that might change humanity forever. Every crew member had a personal routine to calm themselves. Some reviewed maps and data repeatedly, memorizing every detail of the planet's surface. Others meditated or wrote notes to prepare mentally for the encounter. Even the commander, a calm and experienced astronaut, felt the weight of responsibility. It was his job to make decisions that could save lives. Every action, every word, every movement mattered. Outside, the stars glimmered like tiny diamonds, endless and quiet. The planet they were approaching glowed softly in the distance, a mysterious orb waiting for them to explore. When the spacecraft finally entered the atmosphere, turbulence shook it violently. Alarms beeped, and lights flickered as the engines adjusted to the planet's gravity. Some crew members held onto their seats tightly, their hearts racing. Others stared wide-eyed at the view from the window. Clouds swirled below them, strange colors they had never seen on Earth. Shades of purple, green, and gold. Lightning flickered in the distance, not like storms on Earth, but more like dancing threads of energy weaving through the clouds. The planet seemed alive, and for a moment, everyone felt both small and insignificant. Landing was difficult. The surface was uneven, covered in jagged rocks and dense vegetation. The spacecraft shook as it touched down and dust clouds rose around it. Once the engines powered down, silence returned. The crew unbuckled their harnesses and slowly stepped out. Their boots sank slightly into the soft soil, and they could hear faint, strange sounds, whispers of the wind through unusual plants, rustling that did not match any known animal calls. Everything looked both beautiful and unfamiliar. Trees with glowing leaves stretched high into the sky, casting soft lights across the ground. Flowers of all colors seemed to shimmer, as if the planet itself was welcoming them. But beneath the eye, beauty. There was a quiet tension. No one knew what they might find next. The first hours of exploration were cautious. The team moved slowly, scanning the environment with sensors and cameras. Every step revealed new surprises. Small creatures flitting between the trees, plants that seemed to respond when touched, and soft lights pulsing from the ground. The explorers noted everything, eager to record this first contact with a world no human had ever seen up close. They spoke in low voices, aware that noise could startle unknown life forms. Each discovery brought excitement, but also questions. How had these life forms evolved? What secrets did they hold? And most importantly, where was the species they had come to study? At night, the planet transformed. Bioluminescent plants glowed brighter, creating a magical landscape bathed in colors that shifted like liquid. The crew gathered around small lights from their equipment, trying to rest while the strange environment continued to surround them. Some felt awe and peace, while others felt unease. Shadows moved in ways that made it hard to tell what was real and what was imagined. The stars above were different too, with constellations that had no names and planets that glimmered like distant fires. Sleep came fitfully as the mind tried to adjust to a world so different from Earth. On the second day, they began deeper exploration. They followed small tracks, footprints that did not match any known animal. Strange, melodic sounds echoed through the forest, sometimes close, sometimes far away. The team noticed patterns in the environment, as if the planet itself had its own rhythm. The plants opened and closed in response to the sun, and even the soil seemed to have a subtle vibration. Every detail fascinated the scientists, and yet the sense of an unseen presence grew stronger. They were being watched, though, by what they did not yet know. Despite the growing tension, the crew reminded themselves why they were here. They were not just explorers. They were witnesses to a new chapter in understanding life beyond Earth. They took careful notes, measured plant growth, recorded sounds, and captured images. Each discovery was a piece of a puzzle they hoped to solve. Who or what had earned the title of the galaxy's most terrifying species? And would these beings be dangerous or simply misunderstood? The uncertainty kept their senses sharp and their hearts pounding, a mix of fear and curiosity driving every step. By the end of the day, they returned to their temporary camp. Around the small fire-like lights of their equipment, they discussed what they had seen. Opinions varied. Some believed the creatures must be hiding, biding their time. Others thought that the planet itself was the danger, that life forms could be subtle but deadly. Yet, even as they shared theories, they could not shake a strange feeling. Something about this world felt alive in a way that was more than biology. It was as if the planet itself was watching, listening, and waiting, and in that feeling, they realized the adventure they had embarked upon was far bigger than they had ever imagined. As the first part of their journey ended, the crew lay in their sleeping pods, staring at the strange sky. Each of them carried a mixture of excitement, fear, and wonder. Tomorrow they would venture farther, seeking answers to questions that might change everything they thought they knew about life in the galaxy. They had left Earth with a goal, but now the goal seemed both simple and impossible. To understand a species that had been called the most terrifying in the galaxy and to discover whether it truly was what everyone expected. The next morning, the explorers woke to a world that felt even more alive than the day before. The soft glow from the plants lit the forest in gentle shades of green and gold, and the air smelled sweet and fresh. Birds, or at least creatures that looked like birds, sang in melodies the crew had never heard before. Every sound and movement seemed designed to make the forest feel welcoming. Yet, the team could not forget why they were here. They had come to encounter the galaxy's most terrifying species, and so far nothing they had seen matched the stories. Cautiously, the crew moved deeper into the forest, their equipment ready to record any sign of life. The ground was soft, almost springy, and covered in plants that changed color under their feet. The explorers noticed small tracks, tiny footprints with delicate shapes that did not match any known creature. Excitement mixed with caution. Were these the creatures they were searching for? They could not be certain, but every step felt like approaching a mystery. As they walked, they began to notice movement in the trees. Leaves rustled, but there was no wind strong enough to make them sway like that. Shadows flickered, and the explorers caught glimpses of figures darting between branches. When they stopped to watch, the shape seemed almost invisible, blending perfectly with the forest. At first, the team felt a small twinge of fear. What if these creatures were dangerous, hiding until the right moment to strike? But the shapes did not come closer. They observed quietly, never attacking. The explorers slowly realized these beings were watching them just as carefully as they were watching the beings. Finally, the creatures revealed themselves fully. They emerged from the shadows in small groups, moving gracefully through the forest. They were unlike anything the crew had imagined. No sharp teeth, no enormous claws, no heavy threatening forms. Instead, they were small and delicate, with translucent skin that shimmered in the soft light. Their limbs were thin and elegant, and their eyes glowed faintly with colors that seemed to change with every movement. Their presence was calming rather than frightening. Yet, the explorers could feel a strange intensity in their gaze, almost as if the creatures could sense thoughts and emotions. The explorers tried to communicate, speaking softly and gesturing gently. The creatures responded not with sound but with light patterns. Pulses of color traveled across their skin in intricate sequences, as if they were speaking a language of lights. At first, the team struggled to understand, feeling both amazed and frustrated. How could such small, gentle creatures be the species that had terrified the galaxy? They moved with such precision and intelligence, clearly aware of every action of the humans. Yet, they showed no hostility. Over time, the explorers realized the danger, if there was any, was not physical. Some team members began experiencing strange sensations, a fluttering in the mind, sudden dizziness, and moments where the forest seemed to change shape before their eyes. They understood that these creatures had abilities beyond the human senses, influencing perception in subtle ways. Fear and worry amplified these effects, making even the calmest person feel disoriented. Slowly, the crew began to grasp that this species' reputation came not from brute strength or aggression, but from something far more unusual, a capacity to affect the mind itself. Despite these strange experiences, the explorers remained determined to learn more. They spent hours observing the creatures, noting their behaviors, their light patterns, and the way they moved through the forest. It became clear that the beings were highly social and intelligent. They worked together seamlessly, sharing signals and responding to each other's movements instantly. When humans approached with respect and calmness, the creatures seemed curious rather than defensive. This encouraged the team to experiment carefully, using gentle gestures and mimicking the patterns of light they observed. The breakthrough came when one of the scientists managed to mirror a simple pattern. The creature paused, tilted its head slightly, and then repeated the pattern back. The team erupted in quiet excitement. For the first time, they had real communication. More creatures approached, forming small clusters around the humans, observing and responding. There was no fear, no aggression, only curiosity and intelligence. It became clear that these beings were capable of learning and adapting, responding to the humans' actions with thoughtfulness rather than instinctual aggression. As the day went on, the explorers discovered that each creature had unique patterns and behaviors. Some were shy and cautious, hiding behind glowing plants and peering out with wide eyes. Others were bold, moving closer to study the humans' equipment or gestures. The team took meticulous notes, recording every reaction, every pulse of light, and every movement. They realized that the so-called terrifying species had been misunderstood. What humans had feared was actually the result of misinterpretation and stories passed along by those who had only glimpsed these creatures from afar. At night, the forest glowed brighter than ever. The creatures gathered near clusters of bioluminescent plants, their bodies reflecting the lights in a soft rainbow of colors. The explorers watched from a safe distance, amazed by the beauty and complexity of what they were witnessing. For the first time, fear was replaced by wonder. These beings were not monsters. They were intelligent, sensitive, and alive in ways humans had never encountered. The team began to understand that their role was not to dominate or conquer, but to observe, learn, and respect. By the end of the second day, the crew had adjusted to the strange sensations and the subtle influence of the creatures. They shared quiet conversations around their small light sources, discussing the implications of what they had discovered. Their fear had transformed into curiosity and appreciation. They realized that intelligence and sensitivity could be far more intimidating than physical strength, but also far more beautiful. The galaxy's most terrifying species, they now understood, was terrifying only if misunderstood. Seen closely, it was extraordinary, graceful, and deeply fascinating. The explorers prepared to rest, but sleep came slowly. Each member of the crew replayed the day's encounters in their minds, thinking about the creatures, their behaviors, and the subtle ways they had affected perception. Dreams were vivid and strange, sometimes mirroring the hallucination-like sensations caused by the beings. Yet the crew felt safer, more aware, and more determined than ever. Tomorrow they would venture even further, seeking deeper understanding. They were no longer simply explorers. They were students of an alien intelligence, learning lessons about fear, perception, and the unexpected forms of life that existed in the galaxy. As the second part of their journey ended, the explorers lay in their pods, listening to the quiet hum of their equipment and the gentle rustle of the forest. The creatures were out there observing, learning, and interacting in ways humans had only begun to understand. What had seemed terrifying from afar was, in truth, a species of intelligence and beauty, challenging the human mind rather than the human body. The explorers knew that this encounter would change everything they thought about life beyond Earth, and the story of their journey was only beginning. As the third day of exploration began, the crew felt more confident than before. They had learned to observe the delicate creatures with patience, noting how their light patterns and subtle movements created a language of communication. Yet, even with this understanding, the explorers could not ignore the strange sensations that lingered whenever the creatures were near. It became clear that the danger they faced was not physical, but something far more complex, a challenge to the EI human mind itself. At first, the sensations were subtle, a fluttering feeling in the chest, a twinge of dizziness, or brief moments where the forest seemed to shimmer and shift around them. The crew assumed it was fatigue, or the effects of the alien environment. But as the day progressed, the experiences became more pronounced. One member of the team suddenly saw visions of a childhood memory, long forgotten but vividly real, triggered without warning. Another heard the echo of a conversation that had never happened. The explorers began to realize that the creatures could influence perception, subtly altering what was seen, heard, or felt. Despite the unsettling experiences, the crew pressed forward. They reminded each other that fear only amplified the effects. Calmness and focus were essential to maintain control of their own minds. The team adopted strict routines. They measured their pulse, noted their thoughts, and shared experiences regularly to prevent confusion or panic. Slowly, they developed strategies to resist the hallucinatory effects. Breathing exercises, visualization techniques, and teamwork helped them remain grounded. It was an unusual type of exploration, one that tested not strength or speed, but mental resilience and emotional control. The creatures, for their part, remained curious but careful. They continued their light-based communication, often pausing to watch the humans closely. At times, the explorers felt as if the beings could sense fear, joy, or hesitation. When a crew member approached with anxiety or doubt, the hallucinations intensified. When approached with calmness and curiosity, the effects were mild, almost like gentle nudges to the mind rather than full illusions. Over time, the explorers realized that the creature's behavior was not threatening, but defensive, a natural response to the presence of beings whose emotions they could perceive. As the day progressed, the explorers attempted more structured communication. Using a combination of gestures, recorded light sequences, and careful observation, they began teaching the creatures simple concepts: curiosity, cooperation, and play. The creatures responded eagerly, experimenting with new patterns of light and movement. The crew noticed that the hallucinations and perceptual effects became milder when interaction was focused and deliberate. It was as though both species were learning from each other, discovering the importance of intention and calmness in the exchange. During one session, a young scientist named Mara approached a small group of the creatures with a pattern she had created. Her hands moved slowly, drawing a sequence in the air that mimicked their light signals. The creatures paused, then replicated the pattern back in their own glowing language. The crew erupted in quiet cheers, careful not to startle them. This moment marked a turning point. The explorers realized that the creatures were not only intelligent, but capable of understanding the humans' efforts. They were forming connections across an entirely new form of communication, bridging species in a way that transcended sound and speech. Yet, the psychological effects could not be ignored. One crew member, exhausted from repeated hallucinations, experienced a moment of panic. The forest around him shimmered violently, and he struggled to distinguish reality from illusion. The team responded immediately, guiding him with calm voices and gentle touch. Slowly, his perception stabilized. This incident reinforced the lesson that the creatures were not enemies, but beings whose abilities required patience, respect, and careful handling. The explorers learned to move in pairs or small groups, always watching for signs of mental strain and supporting each other through the subtle challenges of the environment. As the day continued, the crew discovered more about the creatures' social behavior. They noticed that the beings had a hierarchy, but it was based on cooperation rather than dominance. Groups worked together seamlessly, sharing light signals and responding to changes in the environment. When humans interacted respectfully, the creatures often included them in their patterns, almost like invitations to join a complex dance. It became clear that the species' intelligence was deeply connected to empathy and perception. The beings were not terrifying because of aggression or strength, but because they could influence minds and sense emotions. By evening, the explorers had gathered an unprecedented amount of data. They recorded sequences of light communication, mapped the creatures' movements, and noted the psychological effects on themselves. The team huddled together near their equipment, discussing their findings. Each member reflected on the transformation of fear into fascination. What they had expected, a monster capable of destruction, was not what they found. Instead, they discovered a species that challenged understanding, requiring humans to adapt mentally and emotionally rather than physically. This revelation was both humbling and inspiring. Nightfall brought a quiet sense of wonder. The creatures gathered in clusters near luminous plants, their bodies reflecting soft, colorful lights. The explorers watched from a safe distance, noticing the intricate patterns of interaction. The forest seemed alive in an entirely new way, as if every living being contributed to a shared rhythm of perception and understanding. The crew realized that the species' reputation as the most terrifying in the galaxy came not from physical danger, but from the extraordinary intelligence and subtle power they possessed. Seen closely, they were not frightening but magnificent, offering lessons about communication, perception, and emotional awareness that humans had never encountered. As the third day ended, the explorers prepared for sleep, their minds buzzing with new understanding. Each person reflected on their experiences, thinking about the delicate balance between fear and curiosity, perception and reality. The creatures had tested them, not with strength or aggression, but with challenges that required focus, patience, and empathy. The team had learned to navigate these challenges, building connections that would shape the rest of their journey. They understood that true exploration was not only about discovering new species, but also about discovering the limits and potential of the human mind. In the quiet of the night, as the crew lay in their pods, they could still sense the presence of the creatures nearby. The forest pulsed with subtle light and soft movement, a reminder that life beyond Earth could be beautiful, mysterious, and demanding in ways they had never imagined. The galaxy's most terrifying species was not what they had expected. It was not a creature of brute strength or sharp teeth. It was a species that tested understanding, perception, and patience, challenging humans to grow mentally and emotionally. And in that challenge, the explorers found not fear, but the excitement of discovery, the thrill of connection, and the beginning of a story that would change everything they thought they knew about life beyond their home planet. The fourth day brought a sense of calm confidence to the crew. By now, they had spent hours observing the creatures and interacting with them in small, careful ways. They had learned to approach slowly, speak softly, and remain aware of their own emotions. Every time a team member felt nervous or fearful, they reminded each other to breathe and focus. The creatures responded to these calm signals, often approaching the humans with gentle curiosity. Each interaction revealed more about the intelligence, sensitivity, and social structure of the species. The explorers noticed that the creatures were not just reacting instinctively. They were thinking, observing, and even experimenting with communication. Some of them would repeat a light pattern over and over, waiting for a human to respond. Others would move in harmony with one another, forming shapes and sequences that were beautiful and complex. The crew was amazed by the level of coordination and intelligence on display. It became clear that these beings were highly social and capable of deep understanding. This realization made the explorers more cautious, but also more respectful. They understood that these creatures were not dangerous in the traditional sense, but they deserved careful attention and consideration. Throughout the day, the crew tried new methods to strengthen their connection with the creatures. They created simple sequences of light and movement, demonstrating curiosity, playfulness, and patience. At first, the creatures watched quietly, but gradually they began to participate, responding with their own patterns. A kind of dialogue emerged based not on words, but on observation, reflection, and shared behavior. Each successful exchange brought excitement to the crew. They realized that fear had transformed into understanding and that their ability to remain calm and respectful was the key to building trust. As the day progressed, the explorers discovered that the creatures had remarkable memory and problem-solving abilities. One creature followed a complex sequence of lights they had used the day before, demonstrating not only recognition, but adaptation. It was as if the species was teaching the humans as much as the humans were teaching them. The team was humbled by this realization. Here was a species that could challenge their minds without ever showing aggression, proving that intelligence and empathy could be far more remarkable than strength or physical power. During a long observation session near a luminous grove, the crew noticed something extraordinary. The creatures seemed to sense the emotional states of the humans more acutely than ever. When a team member felt sadness or doubt, the light patterns became more subdued, almost comforting. When curiosity and joy were present, the creatures' patterns became bright and playful, as if celebrating the interaction. The explorers realized that this species communicated not only with lights and movements, but also through empathy, sensing the emotional energy of others and responding appropriately. It was a form of communication humans had never encountered before. By evening, the explorers had gained enough trust to approach even more closely. They moved slowly, always allowing the creatures to lead. Some creatures reached out with delicate limbs, exploring the human equipment and gestures. There was no fear, only curiosity and understanding. The crew marveled at the harmony between the species, recognizing that respect and patience had bridged the gap between worlds. The fear that had haunted them on the first day had vanished, replaced by fascination and appreciation. The team realized that they were learning more than just facts about an alien species. They were learning lessons about patience, observation, and the importance of understanding rather than judging. The galaxy's most terrifying species, they now understood, was terrifying only in the stories passed down by those who had misunderstood them. Seen closely, they were brilliant, sensitive, and capable of forming deep connections. The explorers felt honored to witness this intelligence and beauty firsthand. As night fell, the creatures gathered in glowing clusters, their lights reflecting in soft, colorful patterns across the forest floor. The humans watched in awe, quietly documenting the sequences and movements. They shared observations with one another, amazed at the complexity of the communication they had discovered. Sleep came easily that night, with dreams filled not with fear, but with light, color, and the sense of connection across species. The crew felt a sense of gratitude, knowing that they had learned a lesson that went beyond science. It was a lesson about respect, empathy, and the potential for understanding life in all its forms. By the end of the fourth day, the explorers felt ready to conclude their close observations. They had gathered extensive data, formed bonds of trust, and gained insights into a species that had once seemed terrifying. They understood that these creatures were not just a subject of study, they were partners in a shared exploration of life, intelligence, and emotion. The journey had transformed the crew, teaching them that fear could be replaced by understanding, and that the most profound discoveries often came from looking beyond appearances. The fifth day began with a quiet excitement. The crew had formed routines of observation and interaction, and the creatures now approached with familiar gestures and patterns. There was no fear, only anticipation. The explorers knew that this would be their final day of close contact, and they were determined to make it meaningful. Every action was deliberate, every movement thoughtful, as they sought to strengthen the connection and leave a lasting impression on the beings they had come to respect. Throughout the day, the crew engaged in playful exchanges with the creatures. They mirrored light patterns, created new sequences, and observed the responses carefully. Each interaction was a form of learning, teaching the humans about perception, empathy, and communication in ways that were entirely new. The creatures responded with creativity, forming intricate patterns that suggested not only intelligence, but joy and curiosity. The explorers realized that this species had a culture of its own, a way of sharing knowledge and experience that went far beyond simple survival. The explorers also reflected on their own growth. Fear had been a constant companion at the beginning of the journey, but it had transformed into wonder, curiosity, and understanding. They had learned to manage their emotions, focus their thoughts, and communicate without words. The creatures had guided them in this process, challenging them to adapt and expand their understanding of life. It was a journey not only through space, but through the human mind and heart. As the day continued, the crew documented the creatures' behaviors in unprecedented detail. They mapped light sequences, noted patterns of movement, and recorded reactions to different gestures. Every detail revealed new insights into the creature's intelligence, social structure, and emotional awareness. The explorers were amazed by the depth of understanding they could reach without spoken language. It was a reminder that communication, empathy, and observation were powerful tools capable of bridging gaps between entirely different forms of life. In the late afternoon, the crew gathered for a final close interaction. They approached a cluster of creatures, using all the skills they had developed over the past days. The beings responded eagerly, their lights pulsing in vibrant, complex sequences. The explorers mirrored these patterns, creating a dialogue of understanding and respect. It was a moment of connection that transcended words, a shared experience between species, separated by distance, biology, and perception, yet united by curiosity and empathy. As night fell, the explorers prepared to leave the planet. They reflected on the journey, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment and gratitude. The creatures had challenged them, inspired them, and taught them lessons that went far beyond science. Fear had been replaced by respect, misunderstanding had been replaced by knowledge, and what had once seemed terrifying was now recognized as extraordinary. The crew knew that their report to Earth would tell a story of intelligence, beauty, and connection, revealing a species that had been misunderstood for generations. Before boarding the spacecraft, the explorers took one last look at the forest. The creatures gathered in soft clusters, their lights pulsing gently in the night. The humans felt a sense of shared understanding, a bond that would remain long after they left. They realized that the most profound discoveries were not about conquering or studying life, but about connecting, learning, and respecting it. The journey had changed them, expanding their minds and hearts, and leaving them with a story that would inspire awe and curiosity for generations. As the spacecraft lifted off, the crew watched the glowing forest fade below them. They carried with them more than data and observations. They carried an understanding of life that transcended fear, a knowledge that the galaxy's most terrifying species was not terrifying at all, but a source of wisdom, beauty, and connection. The journey had ended, but the lessons they learned would continue to guide them, reminding them that the greatest discoveries often come from approaching the unknown with an open heart and a curious mind.